It's David Wowie from Another Eden Adventures, Another Zone, Awakened Zone, Raging Fire Stance, Flash Strike Stance, Hybrid Zone, Extra Zone. What on earth does any of this mean, and how can you use this information to win in battle and avoid dying?
This man is dead.
I'll tell you how in plain English. By the way, if you want good luck for every future banner and want an overall extremely lucky, wholesome life, like and subscribe, baby. The world will thank you, my friend. And if you want to help support my gambling habit, donate a thanks. Also, many thanks to Alcron and Best Boy who helped me cross-check a lot of the information in this video. Before we look at another force, we need to look at zones, man. For the zone experts out there, before you skip this part, there's some nuances you probably didn't know, so keep watching. Let's start with elemental zones, which are the easiest zones for people like me to understand. Basically, elemental zones improve your damage for one element, but make you weaker in another element, with the current exception of Biting Shade Stance, which I'll talk about soon. These zones are activated through your unit's various skills. For example, if you move Tuva Altar from the reserves to the front line, you activate Torn Earth Stance, which puts your team in an Earth zone. And if you use Aisha's skill Flame Serenade, it activates Raging Fire Stance, which puts your team in Flame Zone. Now let's look at this more closely. Let's look at this Raging Fire Stance example. Once your team is in Raging Fire Stance, two big things happen. All your fire damage increases by 50%, but all your wind damage decreases by 50%. You may be wondering what the blue brackets like this 100% means here, more on that soon. But basically, all you need to remember is, with an elemental zone, all the damage in that element increases, but at the same time, the damage in another element will also decrease. In Water Stance, your water damage increases, but your fire damage decreases. In Thundering Stance, your thunder increases, but your shade decreases. In Torn Earth Stance, your earth damage increases, but your water damage decreases. In Wind King Stance, your wind damage increases, but your earth damage decreases. I said but a lot just then. Crystal and Shade zones are slightly unique. In Crystalline Stance, you get a 30% increase in crystal damage, but minus 30 for all other elements. Plus you get a massive number of attack bonuses against enemies weak to crystal attack, which you can see here. In Biting Shade Stance, your shade attack damage increases, but unlike all the other zones, your other elemental damage increases too, which means that if you have a character like Iffy, for example, who puts everyone in Biting Shade Stance, everyone's elemental attacks benefit, so no need to get upset if you have flame users in there and you're in Shade Zone. On top of that, for enemies that resist shade attack, you also get a bunch of damage bonuses. You can screenshot a summary here. Given that these things can change sometimes, I've also included a description link of an up-to-date list in the wiki for your future reference, which also includes the AF bar stats affected by each stance, because all zones also typically improve the rate your Another Force bar fills up, helping you unleash your finishing moves much faster. As a side note, once in a while you'll hear people like me refer to elemental zones like Raging Fire Stance as Flame Zone or Fire Stance. They mean the same thing. So to summarize, elemental stances make one's element's damage go up and another element's damage go down. Raging Fire Stance improves fire damage but decreases wind damage and so forth. The only exception so far is Biting Shade Stance, which increases damage for all elements. What does this mean in battle? Let's say you want to make one or all members of your team deal more damage. For example, let's say we want to make Minalka insanely strong. Well, if you look at her skills, they're fire based. So what we want to do is use a unit like Aisha, for example, to activate Raging Fire Stance to increase Minalka's damage. Once in Raging Fire Stance, you'll see an icon at the top of the screen, and at the start of every turn, you'll see a fire blast indicating you're in fire zone. Also, being in Raging Fire Stance also means your opponent's fire skills also improve and their wind skills decrease in damage. So strategically, if you know which element your opponent is, you may want to use a team whose main element it is weak to, and increase your damage by activating a more dominant elemental zone. At the same time, you'll encounter bosses who activate elemental zones, Gain an advantage in this battle by activating your own zone to override the boss's zone. This doesn't always work, by the way, or don't use a team that could be weakened by that zone. Pro tip, there's actually Grasta you can get that activates elemental zones. For example, the Grasta called Spell Raging Fire lets any team member equipped with it activate Raging Fire stance. My Radius AES has this Grasta equipped, making her an excellent defensive and support unit for someone like Minolka. I've included a description link to the Wiki Grasta page that shows you how to get these Grasta. This goes to show you don't always need characters of one specific element in one team. There are also units that specialize in two elements, such as Eva, who uses water and crystal skills so she can excel in both crystal and water-based zones, and there are units that can adjust their elements to whatever elemental stance you're in. Nekoko, for example, starts off as an earth unit, but her elemental type changes depending on which stance you're in. Does this make sense so far? Good, because it gets even better. By the way, if you have your own tips or experiences with elemental zones, share them below. Also, as I'm spitting out so many facts right now, let's have a little break. Here's a quick video of a dog struggling with life. Beyond elemental zones, we have attack type zones. Then these things you would have seen called hybrid zones, and everyone's favorite, awakened zones. But let's go over attack type zones first. Attack type zones are just like elemental zones, but for attack types. In Another Eden, you have the elements fire, water, thunder, earth, wind, shade, and crystal. You also have the attack types slash, magic, piercing, and bash, and these attack types also have their own zones, which can also be activated by various team members or enemies. Claude Extra Style, for example, activates Dazzling Slash Dance when you bring him from the reserves to the front line. Like with elemental zones, attack zones can strengthen one attack type, but weaken another. Dazzling Slash Dance increases slash damage, but decreases piercing, blunt, magic, and healing moves. So Claude ES activating Dazzling Stance may strengthen someone like Shannon Alter, who is an Earth Slash unit, but weaken someone like Serene Another Style, who, although is an Earth unit, she does piercing and blunt attacks and not slash attacks. Another pro tip, here's where studying your character comes in handy. Know which characters can grant a skill like Flexible. For example, Claude ES has a move called Strata Nike, which grants Flexible. This in turn allows him to change his stance and attack type to the unit of your choosing. You could, in theory, change his stance to Piercing Flash Zone instead of his original Slash Zone to better work with someone like Serene AS. Check out my full guide on Claude ES after watching this video. Anyway, back to each stance. Magic Fate stance strengthens your magic and healing moves but reduces everything else. Piercing Flash Dance strengthens your piercing moves and weakens everything else, and the same goes with Roaring Bash Stance, which improves your blunt attacks, but guess what? Reduces the effectiveness of everything else. So like with your elemental attacks, it's always good to know the attack types of your units when going into battle, and how particular stances can strengthen some members, but weaken the others. Now let's get to the juiciest stuff, man. Hybrid zones, the ever so confusing awakened zones, and finally, a little bonus for you. So what the f are hybrid zones? There are currently 6 hybrid zones. I'll make this super quick, but super understandable. You ready? First is the weird shaped galaxy thing which you would have seen when fighting the Ikwiji bosses. This is called Chaos Stance. This increases fire, water, wind, and earth type attacks. However, it makes it really hard for you to increase your AF bar. You'll notice the Ikwiji bosses use this to greatly power up their skills, and when fighting them, you'll also notice that it's really hard for your AF bar to go up. This is because of Chaos Stance. Next is the Defense Wall, which reduces all damage by 40%. This was introduced by the free character Ashtir. Next we have the Double Strike Stance, Magic Slash, which the free character Surge activates when moving from reserves to the front line. This improves the slash and magic moves, including healing moves of the team, but decreases piercing and blunt. This is useful if you want to combine a sword and magic team together. For example, Minolka and Radius with Garyu and Shion Alter. Next we have Flash Strike Stance, which can only be activated at the first turn of the battle. You may have noticed this when you have Melissa or Serene AS in your team and you see that giant clock thingy appear. That, my friends, is Flash Strike Stance. What does it do? What it does is that it increases all damage moves by 30% and has a healing multiplier. But the crappy thing about this is that it only lasts for one turn. Aww. Then there's Moonlight Stance, which Milsha AS activates when she moves to the front line. It increases the damage of lightning, crystal, and shade users but decreases fire, water, earth, and wind skills. This stance could make her a decent support for your thunder, shade, and crystal types. Finally, there's the Sea of Stars stance, which is pretty amazing as it increases all attack moves by 100%, but only when your Another Force bar is full. So it's designed purely for those Another Force finishing moves. The only problem with this is that it is currently only used by already power crept units, Mayu and Nagi ES. As of now, what I've mentioned are the current available elemental attack type or hybrid zones in the game. As mentioned, I've added a video description link to the wiki, and if you're feeling generous, match me and donate to the wiki as a whole lot of hard work goes behind it. Now let's talk about one of the most confusing but most powerful types of zones in the game, another zone, baby! But before we do, check out this video of this really tiny lion. So what on earth is another zone? If you look up the skill sets of a lot of new units, you'll see something like Initiate Awakened Zone, which for example, you can see with Dewey Alter here. What another zone does is it awakens the current zone you're in. And there are some tricks to this, so keep watching. So let's say you use Dewey Alter to activate Raging Fire Stance. Once you're in Raging Fire Stance, you can use the skill Canon d'Enfer to awaken the current fire stance, hence its name Another Zone, because it elevates or awakens your current zone to create a stronger one. Once awakened, Another Zone either doubles or increases by 60% of your attacks depending on the zone you're in. If you're in a fire, water, wind, earth or shade type of zone, your damage will be doubled once in Another Zone. If you're in an attack zone such as Slash, Magic, Pierce or Blunt, or Thunder or Crystal Zone, your damage will increase by 60%. On top of that, if you're in Crystal or Shade Zone, you'll double the damage against enemies that are weak or resistant to you. Remember, if you're in an Awakened Zone, you still have the negative effects of that original zone. For example, in Fire Zone, as I showed you earlier, wind attacks will still have a 50% damage reduction. So to make things clear, once again, let's look at Dewey Alter. He's in Raging Fire Stance, aka Fire Zone. Then he awakens it to go into Another Zone. All his fire damage will then double. Wind attacks will stay at minus 50% damage. To further clarify this, you'll see a little up arrow above the Fire Stance logo to indicate you're in Another Zone. Awakened zones normally only last for 2 turns, but Dewey Alter is special. He gets an extra 2 turns with Another Zone if he activates it in the front line. Once it's over, the zone will completely vanish. That's right, if you activate Another Zone, both the Awakened Zone and the original zone you were in will vanish. So if you had Raging Fire Stance, for example, then you upgraded it to Another Zone, both the Another Zone and the original Raging Fire Stance will vanish once the Another Zone is over. From here you can activate a new zone if you want. Now let's look at the same thing but with Shade Zone, as the rules for Shade, Thunder and Crystal Awakened zones are a little bit different. In this example we use Iffy to put us in Biting Shade Stance. Then we use, you guessed it, Dewey Alter to awaken the zone. You can typically use other Shade characters such as Isuka Alter to awaken another zone, but I put Dewey Alter in here to show you that although he's a flame unit, he's pretty flexible in that he can awaken the zone of other elements. So to always remember to study characters, because you never know who can do things like this. Now that we've awakened Shade Zone, you can see the little arrow above the zone icon to show that we're in another zone. Now we'll be able to do double the normal damage plus double damage on any enemy that resists shade attacks, such as this Chaos Ogre. When you're in another zone, you can't override it with another type of zone. For example, if you're in an awakened Shade Zone, you can't try and override it with a Fire Zone. You'll have to wait it out. But you can use a unit like Hardy and Hardy AS and Melody Another Style to remove another zones, or any zone for that matter. Typically, units such as Dewey and Isuka Alter can only activate another zone once per battle, but this is changing. Shannon Alter can automatically awaken another zone for 3 turns instead of the standard 2 with the right number of stacks. Upcoming units such as Filmina ES can activate another zone multiple times per battle. Then finally, as a bonus, we have Another Sense. Some characters, if in another zone, have special moves called Another Sense. For example, Isuka Alter, if in another zone, passively activates a skill called Blood Widow, which increases critical rate and magical critical rate of all party members by 100%. Dewey Alter's ability to extend his Another Force by another 2 moves that we discussed earlier is actually his form of Another Sense. In fact, all current Alter units have Another Sense, each with their own unique abilities. So test them out